So imagine this, right? Imagine a world where the real powerhouses, the first world, if you like, of their time, well, they weren't in Europe. They were actually stretched all across Asia, Middle East, Far East, the whole span, for centuries. These places weren't just like cultural centers. They were economic giants.
It's a perspective that, it really challenges how we often look at history, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That Western-centric view. Because before the Industrial Revolution just changed everything, these Asian societies, they were genuinely at the cutting edge. Not just culture, but economic sophistication, too. It's often missed.
Totally. And that's our mission today, really, to do a deep dive into what was driving all this, this incredible, huge network of Indian Ocean trade. We're talking roughly, 7th to the 18th century?
Exactly. A massive period before industrialization just flipped the script globally.
Yeah.
And we're going to unpack how it all worked. Goods, people, really important ideas moving across this gigantic ocean highway. Plus, those vital overland caravan routes feeding into it.
Yeah, can't forget those.
And you'll see some surprising things, like how basic social demand, even cultural habits, really shaped the markets.
Okay.
And we'll get into the specifics of Asian commercial capitalism, what that looked like.
And the people involved.
Yeah.
The merchants, the sailors. What was their daily reality like?
Definitely. And maybe most importantly, what actually happened when European powers showed up. Because they entered a system that was already thriving, already well established.
Right. It wasn't an empty space.
Not at all. And look, this isn't just, dry history. It's really about understanding the deep, deep roots of global connection, how different societies managed to adapt, innovate, and, thrive through trade for over 1,000 years.
Yeah, I think people are going to have some real aha moments here. Stuff that makes you rethink things.
Hope so.
Okay, so let's unpack that idea first. Asian supremacy. When we say first world, before the Industrial Revolution, Middle East, India, Southeast Asia, Far East, what does that mean, like economically speaking?
It means they were the engine, really, the driving force of the global economy back then. The sheer scale of development, their cities, the volume of trade, both inside their regions and externally, it made them the dominant economic bloc.
Wow.
And what's fascinating is how the Indian Ocean itself, it wasn't just water separating them, it actually kind of pulled them together.
An ocean as a unifier. That sounds backwards. How?
Well, think about it. Stretching from the South China Sea all the way to the Eastern Bed, it acted like a human unit, a shared space. It provided the main way for exchange, for interaction. It sort of fostered this shared destiny, even with all the different cultures, created a common economic zone.
Okay, I see. And the key to making this huge space work was the wind, the monsoons. I always found that part amazing.
It's incredible. What's really remarkable is how predictable they were. These seasonal winds, right? Southwest monsoon, April to September, Northeast, October to March. They dictated the sailing seasons with, almost fine precision. It was like nature's timetable for trade. Super reliable.
So if you're a sailor, you knew exactly when to leave to catch the right wind.
Right.
Which means your trip, your cargo. Yeah. It's all more predictable. Safer, maybe?
Safer, more reliable. Yeah, precisely. And the monsoons, they didn't just affect sailing, they actually helped create two distinct agricultural zones in Asia.
Oh, how so?
You had the wheat cultures, often in drier areas, more reliant on caravans, perhaps. And then the rice cultures, flooded fields, bamboo houses, fish diets, that sort of thing.
Wait, so food habits directly shaped trade routes and what was being traded? That's kind of wild.
It absolutely did, fundamentally. India, for instance, grew tons of rice, so they'd export it regularly to the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea, places where it was just too arid to grow rice easily.
Right.
So you see this direct link. Climate, farming, what gets traded. It shows how tied into nature the whole economic system was.
And it gets even more nuanced with the cultural side of trade, right?
Yeah.
Like basic stuff, salt, sugar, clothes. Everyone needs them, but tastes differ.
Exactly. That Iranian preference for ungranulated sugar you mentioned, that directly influenced where sugar was processed and how it was shipped. Little details with big impacts.
So how did things with really specific cultural meanings, how do they find universal appeal? Like incense, maybe?
That's a great question. Take myrrh from Yemen. Super rare. But it had this universal function in religious worship. India, China, Muslim communities, Christian communities, everyone valued it. Its limited supply versus its wide use made it incredibly valuable, even though its main purpose was, ritual.
And what about cowries, those little seashells from the Maldives? Used as currency, but also had symbolic meaning across so many different places.
Right. It shows it's not just about function, it's about representation, shared value.
Or like Chinese porcelain and silk.
Yeah, exactly. The symbolic meanings probably lost on most non-Chinese buyers. But did it matter? Not really. They were just seen as beautiful, skillfully made objects, works of art. So the demand just transcended cultural understanding. It was about quality, aesthetics, that mix utility, symbolism, beauty that's key to understanding this trade.
Okay, this brings us to something huge that influenced this network, the rise of Islam. From the mid-7th century, how did that spur things on?
It really did. The expansion of Islam, for the mid-7th century, it definitely created new political tensions, new zones, no doubt. But it also massively spurred movement. Trans-regional travel, trade, it got a huge boost.
Okay.
You saw this constant swing of the pendulum, you could say, between the Red Sea route and the Persian Gulf route. And that was heavily influenced by where the big Islamic capitals were at the time, Damascus, then Baghdad, Fustat, which is old Cairo.
So the main trade arteries literally shifted depending on where the political and economic power was centered in the Islamic world.
That's a great way to put it. The Persian Gulf route, for instance, was strong early on, great seafaring communities there, plus access to the Tigris and Euphrates rivers reaching deep inland. The Red Sea, a bit trickier. Coral reefs, stronger winds, made it less ideal, especially early on, for really big ships or consistent traffic.
And at the heart of all this movement were the Emporia, these big port cities and caravan hubs. They weren't just dots on a map, were they?
Oh, not at all. They were the absolute nerve centers. Active economic exchange, sure, but also vibrant social hubs, places where you had constant contact with different overseas cultures. Think of the famous ones, Basra, Siraf, Hormuz down in the Gulf, Aden, then Calicut in India, Malacca in Southeast Asia, Surat, Canton. They were truly global cities for their time, melting pots.
I love that description from Juan about the Calicut merchants, how they negotiated. All parties joined hands together and the broker read out the terms. It sounds so formal, established.
It really speaks to the level of organization, the protocols they had in these places. Trust was built into the system. And central to these emporia were the merchants themselves, the Asian merchants. These were serious professionals, highly skilled, usually operating as private individuals. And often they had a surprising amount of political freedom within these port cities because the rulers knew they needed the trade.
So these weren't just lone wolves, they were connected. Part of bigger networks.
Absolutely. A real merchant diaspora. You look at the Jewish community in North Africa, the Cairo Geniza papers show these incredibly tight-knit groups. They even had ways to sanction members who defaulted.
Wow.
Or the Gujaratis from India. Even outsiders said they excelled the Italians in business knowledge.
Praise.
And the Armenians. Found everywhere textiles were made. Famous for finding ways around trade bans. They had this social resilience. They knew how to navigate unstable governments, play rulers off against each other to keep the trade flowing.
Okay, so when we think about what they were actually trading,
Yeah.
it's easy to just picture luxuries, right? Silk, spices, jewels, was that it?
That's a really common image, but it's only part of the story. Yes, luxury items were huge. Silk, fine muslins, porcelain, definitely spices, Moluccan cloves, nutmeg, cinnamon from Ceylon, thoroughbred horses, aromatics like incense, very profitable. But a massive amount of the trade, the real volume, was in bulk goods.
The everyday stuff, rice, salt, sugar.
Exactly. Building materials, timber, basic metals, iron, copper, lead, tin, things societies actually run on.
And why carry that alongside the high-value stuff?
Well, two key reasons. One, people needed these things. But two, for the ships, it was ballast. It made the voyage more stable. And for the merchant, mixing goods spread the risk. Lose a whole ship of just spices. Devastating. Mix it up with some rice or timber. You might still make a profit, or at least not lose everything. Diversification was smart.
Makes sense. So normal supply and demand drove things, local surpluses, deficits. But what about the big shocks, the unpredictable stuff?
Yeah, the calamities. They could hit hard. Famines were brutal. Gujarat, called the Garden of the World, became a complete wilderness in the 1630s famine. Trade just stopped.
Wow. A complete wilderness.
Wars, big storms at sea. These weren't small bumps. They could wipe out regional economies for a time.
That sounds incredibly volatile. How do they manage prices or uncertainty in that kind of environment? Do they have anything like, modern finance tools?
They were actually remarkably sophisticated for the time. You had spot markets buy it now, but also forward markets agree on a price for goods to be delivered later.
Okay.
Brokers were crucial. They helped smooth out price swings. The coffee market in Yemen, for example, was apparently very organized.
And speculation, were people gambling on prices?
Oh, definitely. But they were also wary of overtrading. There's this great quote from a merchant, Robert Cowan, who thought an 80% profit was a poor return. Gives you a sense of the risks, but also the potential rewards they were chasing.
80% is poor.
Okay.
And how did they pay for all this? Was it all gold and silver coins clinking around?
Not entirely, which is interesting. You had commodity money in some places, like a roll of silk or basket of rice could function as a unit of account, especially in parts of China, North Africa maybe.
So you could trade goods for other goods using an agreed value.
Sort of, yeah, or at least use it for bookkeeping.
Yeah.
But in the Middle East and India, mostly precious metals, gold, silver, copper coins were the main currency. China was kind of unique, though. They used silver bullion, basically chunks of silver that were weighed and cut, not made into standard coins. And China also experimented really early with paper currency, like 7th century. Often didn't work out too well, but it shows they were thinking about finance in, well, almost modern ways.
Pretty advanced. So even with commodity money, it sounds like a complex system.
It was. Individual deals might have been small scale compared to today,
Yeah.
but add it all up. Cumulatively, it was huge for the regional economies, no question.
And where did the merchants get the capital? Was it all family money?
A lot of it was family wealth, yeah. But also community support. Think of the Jain community in Cambay and Surat, incredibly tight networks. Sometimes even rulers or aristocrats might invest, like Mughal princes.
It sounds like a pretty good time to be a merchant then, a golden age.
In many ways, yes. But, and this is maybe a key difference from, say, early European capitalism, there was this dilemma of wealth and investment. Asian merchants often faced the risk that the state, the rulers, could just take their wealth through taxes or just outright seizing it.
Right.
So that risk, that potential erosion of their material status, it really influenced how they invested, often led them to diversify, maybe keep assets more liquid, rather than sinking everything into huge fixed things like factories later on in Europe.
Okay, that makes sense. A different kind of calculation.
Yeah.
Now, if you're looking for a moment where things really started to shift, a big disruption, it has to be the Portuguese arriving, right? 1498.
Oh, absolutely. Their arrival was, well, the sources call it a violent interruption. Yeah. Before them, the Indian Ocean was mostly seen as like no man's territory. Open seas not really controlled by any single power. The Portuguese brought a whole different model, basically the Mediterranean style of armed trade and asserting control. They tried to claim exclusive sovereignty over the sea.
And that's where the Cartazes system comes in, forcing local ships to buy passes.
Exactly. These safe conduct passes. Pay us customs duties, buy our pass, or we attack your ship. It was basically protection money on a massive scale, a fundamental challenge to how things had worked for centuries.
And they didn't just demand money, they took key locations.
Right. Their strategy was grab the choke points, the most profitable ports. Goa, Malacca, Hormuz, control the flow. Goa especially. Albuquerque called it the principal key. He even wanted permanent colonizations, settlers. A totally different mindset.
But the Portuguese weren't the last Europeans. The Dutch and English East India companies came next, and they were different again, weren't they?
They were. Very different. These weren't swashbuckling adventures in the same way. They were huge bureaucratic trading companies. The VOC, the English EIC, and their big innovation, if you like, was the focus on single unbroken voyages, all the way from Asia directly back to Europe.
Ah, so cutting out the middlemen, the short stages across the Middle East.
Precisely.
Right.
Before, goods might change hands many times between Asian merchants. Now, one European company controlled the whole chain, from source to the European market. It fundamentally rerouted trade flows.
And they were pretty aggressive about it.
Extremely. They aimed for monopolies. The Dutch, VOC, notoriously tried to control all the fine spices, pepper too. Brutal tactics sometimes. And you see their impact on Europe itself. Indian cotton textiles. They became huge, indispensable items for daily clothing. That demand helped fuel the textile mills of the Industrial Revolution later on. And you see them taking over key ports, too. The Dutch grab Malacca in 1641. The English take Hormuz from the Portuguese in 1622. Bombay gets transferred to the English in 1661. It's the start of a whole new maritime order dominated by these companies.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit. What about the people actually on these ships, life at sea? Were Asian sailors and navigators? Were they skilled? How did they compare?
It's really crucial to understand that Asian navigators were incredibly skilled. This wasn't primitive stuff. They had deep knowledge, abstract principles, yes, but also vast practical experience. People like Ibn Majid wrote detailed guides, treatises on navigation. They weren't just hugging the coast. They were accomplished deep-sea sailors using stars, currents, wind patterns, even birds, and the look of the water.
So sophisticated navigation was already happening, and the ships themselves, were they up to the job?
Oh, absolutely. You had a whole range of capable Asian vessels. The big lateen-rigged ones, the booms, common in the Arabian Sea and Indian Ocean, the famous tall-masted Chinese junks, Indonesian praus, vessels like baglas, kochias, ganja, lots of variety.
And that detail about sewn ships is amazing. Planks sewn together.
Yeah. With core, that's coconut fiber rope. Only sewn together with Cairo, as one source puts it. Sounds flimsy, but they were actually really flexible, good in heavy seas, resilient, different technology than the big European ships using iron bolts, but effective.
But even with good ships and skilled crews, it must have been incredibly dangerous out there.
Oh, it was always dangerous. A mariner's world was full of risk. Pirates were a constant menace all across the ocean. And natural hazards, typhoons, storms, the story of the Portuguese Carrack Santa May just breaking up in a storm. Terrifying. There was even a known hurricane belt south of the equator everyone tried to avoid.
Right.
Yet despite all that, the basic passage time of a ship dependent on sails stayed pretty consistent for centuries, thanks to the predictability of the monsoons. People knew the risks and planned around them.
And who was actually in charge on board? What was the structure?
Well, the most important figure was usually the Nakuta. He was often the ship owner, or at least the merchant, chartering the ship, deciding the route, the cargo. He was the boss of the whole venture.
Okay.
Then you had the Muyelim, the pilot or navigator. He's the one using the instruments, the star charts, but also reading the signs, watercolor, birds, seaweed, cloud shapes, even the smell of the land. And a big ship could have a complex crew. One account lists 12 different categories of seamen. It was organized.
There's one story that really seems to capture the scale, the investment, and the ultimate risk involved. That English ship.
Ah, the Prince of Orange. Yes, it's a tragic story, but very illuminating. Built for over 10,000 pounds, a huge sum then. Armed with 20-something guns. Shows you these were major, major investments.
The voyage itself sounds like a nightmare even before the end. Press gangs, scurvy.
Exactly. The captain struggled with finding crew, then hit disease in Madagascar, then faced storms in the Persian Gulf. Just one challenge after another.
Loaded with valuable textiles from Gujarat.
Yep. A huge cargo. It sailed from Anjengo, India on March 1st, 1746, and just vanished. Never heard from again.
Wow.
The loss. Estimated at 100,000 pounds. Massive. But here's the kicker. The sources say this kind of total loss was actually relatively rare.
Relatively rare. Losing a ship worth that much.
Yeah, it really brings home the reality of the trade. The risks were immense, astronomical even, but the potential profits, averaged out over many voyages, must have been consistently high enough to make people keep taking those risks century after century. That's what drove this whole system.
What a journey. We've covered over 1,000 years here. This whole sophisticated system, Asian civilizations, these incredibly savvy merchants, the sailors risking everything, building a truly global economy way before we usually think of one existing. Seeing how it all interconnected economics, culture, even the wind.
Yeah, the monsoons, the trade routes, the cultural tastes, it was all woven together. And if you think about the bigger picture, yes, things shifted dramatically around 1750 with rising European power, no doubt. But that shift didn't just erase everything that came before. The networks, the ports, the cultural links, so much of that deep history laid down over centuries continued to echo, and you could argue still shapes our interconnected world today in ways we don't always see.
So, as you, our listeners, think back on this deep dive, maybe consider how much of what we call modern global trade, supply chains, finance, dealing with risk, cultural exchange, actually had roots, surprising parallels in this earlier first world.
Mm-hmm.
What lessons could we maybe take from their resilience, their adaptability, their unique ways of operating, something to think about? What stands out most to you from this 1,000-year story?